All right, here we go. It's that moment of truth where I have to awkwardly wake up, or I have to awkwardly, no, I'm awake. I have to wait for the internet to wake up. You guys know what I meant. All right, YouTube, you're awake. Rockfin, how you doing? YouTube beat Rockfin by a little bit. You guys know I don't love that. I don't love it when YouTube beats Rockfin, but that's the world we're living with. What's up, everybody? Good afternoon, good evening, good morning. Happy Monday. Welcome to Get Your News On with Ron, and this is the interview show for the week. This is the show where I conduct an interview, and I'm really excited about this. But first, let me give a quick shout out to the folks who help make the show possible. Our friends over at Indie Left. Indie Left is the a place to find all the content creators and streamers you know and love. They curate a list. They update it twice a day to find out everything they got going on and to subscribe to their Discord. Check them out at independentleft.media. That's independentleft.media. All right. So my guest today, he is a musician. I actually grew up with a lot of his music. He is into politics. And he's a hockey guy. So we have three things in common, and I'm excited to talk to him about all three of them. Please welcome to the show. He's active with the band Good Riddance, and he also has a solo career. Please welcome to the show, Mr. Russ Rankin. Russ, what's up, buddy?
Morning. How are we doing?
Good, good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks.
So let's jump into it. I grew up with your music. I listened to your band for many years, and what would you say? What would you say is kind of some of the biggest changes you see just in as a touring musician and in punk rock in particular, from when you got started to now?
I think that just the industry side of it, just the way people consume music these days is just different. You know, we still have CDs and records at our shows, and I mean, and vinyl is still pretty. There's still a thriving vinyl market. Like people love collecting vinyl, and so, but like people don't really buy CDs anymore. I know I don't. Everybody streams music, so the way that music is consumed is different. And I think that there's sometimes I wonder why bands even bother making like the traditional album anymore. It's like some people I know, they'll record a bunch of songs and they'll release them like 2 or 3 at a time,
right,
to create more buzz, because the context of an album, like I've got this thing and it's this many songs and it only came out this one time, that's kind of going away. Or like it's the ability for people to listen to albums. Like when a friend of mine's band puts an album out, you know, I have Apple Music and I just listen to it, and I guess I own it because I'm paying this monthly thing. So I own millions of albums that I may never listen to. Like it's just the concept of ownership and the product, I guess, of music is totally different. And so I know our band kind of is trying to straddle this, like, hey, we're Gen Xers, and we came up during this time in music where there was cassettes and CDs were new, and now it's completely different. Like we're trying to still find our way. Like, what do people want from us at shows? I guess, like, how are we going to sell our music at shows, or do we even do that anymore? Or maybe it's just vinyl because people love the collectible colored vinyl and limited edition stuff. So that's the biggest change that I've noticed, I guess, from being in a band that has to not only write and record music that we like, but find a way to give people something at shows to buy.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's interesting because I think there's still that sect of listeners that do want that physical thing, and I'm among them. So vinyl has stood the test of time, comparatively speaking, because it sounds better than CDs, and it's just a cooler thing to have. So even though it's more expensive and God knows it's not fun to carry around, especially as a band. I'm sure lugging the vinyl is not your guys' favorite thing. But I mean, I still buy vinyl. I can't tell you the last time I bought a CD. And as a comedian, when I did my album, I just did download cards. I didn't even do CDs.
Yeah, the CDs, I feel like, is kind of on its way out, because either I have this vinyl that is cool and collectible, and I've got my special record player for it, and or I'm just streaming. Like I'm doing one of those two things, and so there's not really a place for CDs anymore, or at least in my day-to-day life. And I don't even do vinyl because I'm a minimalist and I don't like things and clutter.
Hmm.
But I know a ton of people that love vinyl. Even
Yeah.
people who are younger who don't really remember vinyl. Like I grew up with vinyl, but people who are like, oh, this is really cool, and I'm gonna go buy myself a rad like turntable at Urban Outfitters and play my records, and I mean, I always liked it because of the size of it, and like getting a new record home and putting it on and pulling out the lyric sheet, and like I just love that whole experience. And the CD's just not quite the same. But we still sell CDs at our shows. I don't know how many we sell, but we have them there available.
Yeah, it's interesting because, well, how do you feel about? Well, first of all, I want to ask you based on something you said. When you describe yourself as a minimalist, like what do you mean by that exactly? Is that an environmental choice? Is that just a personal choice? Like what does that mean to you?
It means it means that I just don't like clutter. I don't like things. So like my house, like if I have a living space, it's typically as Spartan as possible, just down to the basic thing. So not a lot of knickknacks around, not a lot of junk. Well, junk is not the right word. Like just for me personally, it's a choice.
Sure.
And so I don't have. I like not having to have CDs. I have vinyl that I grew up. Vinyl is up at my mom's house. Like I have these crates because I started buying records in the early '80s, and I have a ton of vinyl up there. But a lot of it I archived, with one of those USB turntables.
Oh
So
yeah.
it's in my iTunes library.
So when you how do you feel about just like you mentioned the album is sort of becoming a lost thing, and how do you feel about that? Because it's like I personally, just as a listener and as a creator, even though I don't do music, I do comedy, but I have mixed feelings towards it because I do love the whole. It's an album. There's artwork. There's a concept. It's telling a story, but I also get that, you can get your music out there just a lot easier, and that's cool. However, on the same note, I use Spotify because it's the world we're living in and it's an easy way to find music. But I feel a little guilty when I do it because I'm like, okay, this artist is getting a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a penny right now. So what's your take on all that?
I think that, like for an example, like I just recorded a solo album this past summer, but like it used to be like it was an event. Having recording an album was an event, and I guess it still is. But I just think that because of the way we all consume music, or like a lot of people consume music, like I don't my like when a band record, like let's say Pennywise releases an album, I'm gonna go listen to it probably 2 or 3 times. But at the same time, I could just listen to a song, and
Hmm.
I own it all regardless with the subscription that I pay. And so there's not this, like, I'm not viewing it as this individual project that a band, brainstormed and labored over and did cover art for. I'm thinking of it as a bunch of songs that are in a sea of other millions of songs that I could listen to as a whole or in pieces. So it just breaks down a little bit differently. And I think that I like, as a musician, as someone in a band, like I like the idea of an album, like a concept, like, hey, this is what we've worked this year on. Like this is where we're at right now with our music, like this bunch, this collection, like this is what we have for you now. And it's a reflection of who we are and what we're going through, and it's a reflection of the times, and it's a reflection of a combined effort of creativity. So I think that I would be sad as a band member if suddenly there was no albums, and they're like, and the Fat Records was like, yeah, when you have a couple songs, just we'll release them. That would seem so strange to me, but I feel that that's the way people consume music. Maybe not.
So let's get into politics a little bit. Um, you're a very politically minded guy. Your Twitter is very active. Have you always been that way? Just growing up, just as a person, and in particular, what kind of radicalized you? What kind of turned you on to paying attention to that part of the world?
So my parents were like we all there was always politics discussed at home when I was a kid.
Where'd you
And my
grow up?
here, Santa Cruz.
Okay.
So uh my parents were both like Carter Democrats. And my earliest memories are sort of like I believe Nixon was president and my mom called him Tricky Dick. And they were not fans of Richard Nixon. And so they always watched the news at night, and there would be at the dinner table there'd be talk about, I think Watergate was happening and stuff like that. And so I was aware of it. I was aware of politics from an early age. Like my parents just always talked about it. They didn't talk about it all the time or go to rallies or anything like that. My mom was always involved with League of Women Voters and was really active in local politics. My dad worked for the county, and then he was an attorney in private practice. Um, but my dad's dad, my grandfather, was the Assistant Attorney General of the United States under Dwight Eisenhower and was also on the Warren Commission. So there's like politics and political involvement is in my family. But I just remember my parents talking about it, and back then too, like the Vietnam War was kind of winding down and just learning about that and asking my parents questions about what was going on TV and things like that. And my mom would always tell me to look it up, which back then meant go find an encyclopedia or something. And so I was aware of that. And then if you want to know what radicalized me, I think in 1983 was the first time I really heard punk rock, and I heard the Dead Kennedys, and that was it for me. I just dove down into the rabbit hole and never came out. And I was attracted to all of the political bands, mostly like the Dead Kennedys. At that time, it was Crass, Conflict, Crucifix in the Bay Area. Yeah, any bands that were singing about politics really made me like aware of what was going on, and or had me give me questions. Like listening to the Dead Kennedys, it's like, okay, who's Pol Pot? So you go research that, and like, what's this song about? What's that song about? What's Bleed for Me about? And like you learn about our involvement in South America, and it's just all these kinds of things. So the punk music that I got into is what really sort of formed my earliest political ideas, which is basically just social justice, equality, tolerance, and just questioning things that were being sold by the culture industry and by the dollars behind the political figureheads in our country.
Yeah, I still like. I'll still California Uber Alles, as the years have gone by, has become more and more of like you have those songs where it's like this is a coping song. And that's one of those songs that, I mean, even though it was written during a different time, and it's still usually whenever something happens in California that does not please me politically, which is often, I will play that song as sort of a catharsis. Like that's one of those like healing songs because I'm kind of that way too. Like I grew up with a lot of punk rock music and it made me look into deeper issues. And now, like, as someone, as now that I'm a little older, it's also a coping mechanism. Is that the case for you too?
Coping, I don't know if I would term it that way. I think that it's more, it just recycles my anger.
Hmm.
Like even in my own band, like singing songs that I wrote like 25 years ago, and with hopes that like the world would be a better place 25 years from now, and here we are, and these lyrics could apply to like today.
Yeah.
and just the feeling of frustration, and like ultimately that we failed as a movement, and that, like the sort of kicking myself for the naivete that like this might actually foment some kind of social change, and probably I'm selling it short, but that's like where my head goes. It's like, man, you wrote these songs, and so did hundreds of other bands, and look where we still are, and wishing that it wasn't that way.
That's heavy. I mean, that's heavy and that's hard because, well, would you say, like, I mean, I know how you're saying sometimes you feel that way when you're frustrated, but when you kind of take a step back and look at it big picture, would you say that the movement, quote unquote, is a failure? And if so, what movement are you referring to specifically? Like punk rock or a lefty movement or a little bit of everything? Like what movement would you say
I think I
has
think Well, I think punk rock as a relevant social movement. But then the thing is, like, nobody ever said that it was, and so it's what each of us wants it to be. Like there's a lot of bands out there that I like, punk rock bands that have nothing politically relevant to say, and they're still great. They're still great and fun to listen to. And punk really is, when you get down to it, probably most of us would agree it's about the energy and the attitude and the kind of fuck you, and that just because I'm have a political bent, just because that's where my kind of like lyrics go, that doesn't mean that everybody else has to do that.
sure.
And so that there never was like a world meeting of punk where we all decided we were going to become a social movement. Now, I would have been front and center had that happened, but that wasn't the case. And that's probably part of why punk is so cool. Like, it's whatever people want it to be for themselves. I'm disappointed that you know when thousands of us get together for punk rock bowling, that we don't march immediately to the Capitol and force an agenda. But the truth is, most people go to punk rock bowling to party and have a good time, and that's it. So my frustrations are of my own creation. You know what I mean? Like, nobody said, "Hey, Russ, what do you think punk should be?" We'll be that thing that you want. Like, nobody ever asked me that.
Hmm. Well, do you find some solace in the knowledge that over the years your music and many others' music has resonated with a lot of young people, and particularly people who maybe they didn't really fit in anywhere else, and punk rock kind of rescued them in many ways. I mean, I'm sure that's something you get a lot from your fans, and I mean, do you find some solace in that, and in knowing that this music has helped a lot of people? Even if it's as small as they feel a little less alone a couple times a year when they get to go to shows.
I probably don't think about that as often as I could. I get feedback from people who've been inspired to make life choices, by our band or bands like us. That probably these life choices they're inspired to make, they have probably caused them to be, uh, like a little source of hope or change in the world. Like, if people listen to a band and are inspired like I was. I mean, the reason I get it is because that's what bands did for me.
Mhm.
Like, pretty much entirely my worldview, my lifestyle is almost all completely been shaped by punk and hardcore music. And so I understand the gravity of that, and I understand that kind of stuff doesn't always show up in like really big statistics. When somebody can like hear or be exposed to something that sort of like turns a light bulb on for them, and then they, in their little circle of life that they have, like with their family and friends and workplace and communities, are able to sort of push outward for social change, which lifts the greater good up. Policies of equality, like I said, and social justice, and just makes the world a little less fucked. Like, I think that that's really cool to be a part of that. I guess I probably don't think about that as often as I could. I tend to gravitate towards the negative
Don't we
mindset.
all?
Yeah. It's like, I mean,
Uh,
like if you follow my social media, like it's just, I just get yelled at all day long. And so eventually, sometimes it's a little much and it's hard
do
to.
you engage the trolls? Are you I mean, I do follow you on Twitter, but I don't, like, dive into the threads. Are you, like
Twitter's not as bad as like Instagram. Um, but I know I don't engage, but it's sad. It's sad and it's interesting that people who think I'm that stupid would still follow me. Like that's the part I don't understand. But it's okay. It's whatever. If one person like sees something that I post, and it's mostly the animal rights stuff. Like I was exposed to animal rights and made changes in my life based on things that were put in front of me by people just like me back then, who, eventually, like I couldn't continue doing what I was doing, and so I'm grateful to those people who confronted me, who basically put the facts in front of me and said, like, dude, you can't deny that this is going on. Like, what are you going to do about it? And so, like, I'm just trying to do the same thing, and what people can take from it what they want. But it's crazy how triggered carnists get when you're just making these pleas for kindness and for environmental sanity. Like it triggers people really bad, and that's just sort of that gets a bit much after a while. But I'm not going to stop.
what kind of feedback do you get on Instagram? I mean, what are some of the triggers that people have towards animal rights?
Well, mostly people think that I'm trying to tell other people what to do,
Sure.
and so I got a lot of the like. There's like they think I'm telling them what to do, and so they're defensive, and they insult me, or they think, or I have the "you do you" crowd a lot. They're like, "Hey man, just do you, let me do me." And I wish that there was a section of the world that was like sealed off from the effects of climate change, so the "you do you" people could just, they could do their thing, and then I wouldn't have to like what they're doing. Like the meat and dairy industry is destroying the entire planet for all of us, the "you do you" people and me. And so, like, if there was just a place in the world where the "you do you" people could like they could do them and suffer their own consequences without the rest of us being affected by it, I'd be all for it. But it's not the world we're living in.
It's somebody tweeted this once at someone, and it was someone was actually getting on me for something I said, and and they tweeted at this person, and it was one of the most beautiful responses I've ever seen, where they said to that person, they were like, "I wish there was a way that you and you alone could inherit the world you're fighting for." And I thought that was, like, the best troll response I've ever heard in my life. I was like,
Mhm.
That's powerful." But unfortunately, going on what you're saying, that's not the way it works. We're all, inheriting this world, and it's a pretty bleak one. Well, what are your if you had to kinda sum it up with the most pressing issues affecting the United States right now? I mean, obviously, you hinted at climate change, but, what are kind of your top ones right now in regards to the contemporary United States and just looking the world at large too?
Oh my God, how much time do we have?
As much as you want, man.
Well, I've been a member of the Green Party for, oh man, 20 something years, and it's a tough go because I feel like a lot of progressives, almost everybody I know, would call themselves a progressive, falls under the Green Party sort of like um, tenets.
Mhm.
But then every 4 years, all of these progressives run terrified into the arms of Democrats who don't give a fuck about real progressive policies, never have, but will gladly take these frightened votes every 4 years. And so that's upsetting. And I think that some things that could combat that would be to abolish the electoral college. I think that ranked choice voting is
Yes.
super important because a lot of people I know are like, hey man, like I would vote Green, but there's this, the Republican boogeyman of the year that we got to block, and that happens every 4 years. And so there's always going to be a fucked somebody, there's always going to be that person. And
Yeah, well,
so,
that's how the duopoly keeps it up, you know?
yeah,
It's like the only way the Republicans are able to be as gruesome as they are is because the Democrats are so fricking ineffective, and the only way the Democrats are able to be as ineffective as they are is because of how gruesome the Republicans are, and it just keeps the gravy train a rolling, and then they count on people just, forgetting everything the past 4 years and taking their chance on the next snake oil salesperson, and I think that, going on what you're saying, because there's so much set up in place to make sure the Green Party or any other third party movement doesn't get any type of power.
yeah. So the ranked choice voting, it would eliminate part of it, because now all my progressive friends could vote Green with their first choice, and they
Right.
could vote Democrat with their second choice. And so there's no more spoiler. There's no more strategic voting. Uh, Abolishing the Commission on Presidential Debates, I think, would be a huge, because a lot of people that I've spoken to don't realize that when we have the presidential debates on primetime TV, that it's a show. Like, it's nothing substantial, and it's created by this silent corporation made up of Democrats and Republicans that has no political mandate, and they're in charge of where the debates happen, who the moderators are, what the questions are, and who's invited.
Oh,
And in
Russ, you
2004,
there?
yes, I'm here. Can you hear me? I'm here. You got me?
Uh-oh. Looks like we're having some connection issues here. Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. I think our connection just went a little haywire for a minute, but I think we're back.
Yeah. Weird.
Okay.
I could hear you the whole time.
Oh, really? Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, you went out on my end, and then I went out on my end, but now it looks like it was just a hiccup, and we're back. Um, alright, well, I'm
So
sorry.
that's
Yeah,
okay. Yeah. So what I was just saying real quick is that the Commission on Presidential Debates needs to be abolished, because it's just a private corporation that gets to decide what this show is going to be that we call presidential debates. And they don't, Green Party candidates aren't allowed. The Libertarian Party, the third biggest party in the country, is not allowed. And when they show up, when these candidates show up to these debates, candidates that are on the ballot in enough states to win, they're arrested for trespassing and then held until the debates are over, and then they're released. That happened to
Jill
David
Stein.
Cobb, happened to Jill Stein, happened to David Cobb and Michael Badnarik in 2004. And Americans, I don't think most Americans realize that. And like, the debate should be open. I think that if your party is on enough ballots to mathematically win, then I thought that person ought to be at a debate. I mean, that's how they do it in Australia, in the UK, in Canada, any other functioning Western democracy. That's how they do it. And so we have low voter turnout because most voters are marginalized out of the system. They don't see a policy that they agree with. They don't know really what's on the table, and many voices are kept out of the whole picture. And so I think that that's hurtful to a democracy. But it's by design. Like, it's not an accident that it happens that way. And then you get progressives, who are like a lot of my friends, intelligent people that I look up to, who end up voting for Democrats every 4 years, who don't give a fuck about them or their demands. And so we're settling for neoliberalism, for war, pro-war Democrats. We're settling for policies of austerity. We're settling for no single payer health care. Just We're settling for centrism that doesn't really lift anybody up, and
Yeah,
it's
well, and
it's upsetting.
in a lot of those other, Western democracies, it wouldn't even be centrism. It would be considered far right in a lot of other places. I mean, that's the thing. It's like it's not like we're just settling like, oh, the Green Party's better. It's like we're settling for something that is completely unacceptable. Like, we're settling for something that's destroying the planet. And when they bring up this whole like, oh well, compromise. Don't be a purist. It's like, well, what do you what purist? Like we want to stay on this planet. That's the purity test. We want to stay on this freaking planet. And yeah, I'm with you. And then in these other systems where it's like they have more proportional representation, usually they do have like two parties or so that are the most powerful parties. Yeah. But these parties also have to reach out. They have to reach across to the other smaller parties, be it the Greens or the Communists, the Socialists, whoever else, because they hold some seats. So they got to win them over. So, the bad isn't as bad. And it's just more, for lack of a better way to put it, it's just more democratic. So it's like we have this system that's deliberately set up to make sure that Greens can't really get that far, that libertarians, whoever the third party is, can't really get that far. And we just have to change the entire system. And I mean, one of the things that I think we glossed on is like we have to get money out of politics because, ranked choice voting is awesome and totally important and totally essential. But when you still have this unlimited amount of money that these corporate parties can spend, it's still going to be totally lopsided.
Yeah, you can't. It's sort of like if there's no magic bullet, right? Like
Sure.
these things have to happen in concert. Ranked choice voting, eliminating the Commission on Presidential Debates, overturning Citizens United. Like all of these things have to happen in concert. It needs to be kind of a reset,
Hmm.
and people need to actually earn people's votes. I also think that we should abolish the United States Senate, just
Oh, I
completely
agree.
get rid of it.
Yes.
Like it's the most useless entity, and most of these things that we're talking about are only there because of the Senate. And the United States Senate just continues to allow the minority to hold the majority hostage in this country, and it's just useless. And but another big problem is a lot of Americans who are resistant to change are Americans that haven't traveled and seen or paid attention to other politics of other countries. And if I hadn't traveled, I might feel the same way. I don't know. And
When was
having been in other countries that are having elections and trying to flip it on the news and being like, oh wow, there's like 5 or 6 people in this debate. Like that's probably how our country should be. But these other countries don't even like it. Doesn't even they don't even think about it. It's just a matter of course. Like yeah, this is the most important choice you're asked to make as a citizen. You probably ought to be informed. You know what I mean?
when was because I'm presuming you've been all over the world just about. When did you have a particular first moment where you had one of those experiences you just described, where like there was an election going on and you're looking at it and you're like, why isn't the US like this? And what was that experience?
Well, I think that learning about at the time it was Germany, learning about uh, in a unicameral system of governance, how coalitions are built, and those types of compromises are made, and how there really isn't one over. There isn't one party that's like in charge of everything, and how kind of cool that was. And so,
Mhm.
and then also just walking down the streets of Germany, and this happened in Canada too, and just seeing like posters on every wall or billboard or telephone pole and for all these different parties. And obviously it can't logic would dictate that you wouldn't want to have like every single person that wants to have a political party in the picture, but there can be more than two.
Mhm.
Like I think if a party has enough support and enough registered voters and is on enough ballots to mathematically win an election, I think the American people have a right to see what that party has to say and what its platform is, and then have those party leaders have the ability to ask the other party leaders questions. I mean, like if you watch what we call this presidential debates that we have on TV, it's complete theater. It's softball questions, and nobody calls anybody out because the same money is backing both horses. And so I think that when I flicked on the TV in Canada, this is just a few years ago, their general election, and the news, every news channel was reporting on 5 different parties. It's like the 5 biggest parties in Canada. Like, is the Bloc Québécois ever going to win power in Canadian Parliament? Probably not. But they're there right alongside all the other parties. You know, are the Greens ever going to win power in Canadian Parliament? Probably not. But there should be Greens in Parliament. There should be Bloc Québécois in Parliament. And when you have those other voices, like if there's a couple of Greens in Congress, maybe it's not so easy to pass some of these some of these laws. Maybe it's not so easy to go to war in the Middle East when there's somebody standing up going, wait a minute, like what's this about? Like, why are we doing this? And so I think those voices are important, and countries like Canada or Australia or the UK or anywhere else, they recognize that. And so just because the Green Party may not have enough people to win the presidency doesn't mean that it's not a viable platform that people should know about. You know, I voted for Bill Clinton twice when I was still a Democrat. And the second time I walked into the voting booth was when I had my moment. I looked at the ballot, and there was 3 or 4 other people on there that I had never heard a word of. You know, and like everybody else, I'm glued to 24-hour news in the United States. We have 24 hours a day of news, all these networks, and nobody had bothered to tell me anything about these other candidates. And this is the single biggest choice I'm asked to make as a citizen. And I was like, wait a minute, this is fucked up. Like, why do I not know who these people are? And then I did some research in the Green Party and realized that was the party for me. But that was the moment where I was like, this is really fucked up. And then later on, after Citizens United, and realizing that there's this cabal of entrenched wealth and power that basically puts the same amount of money up to the Democrats and the Republicans, because whichever party wins the election, entrenched wealth and power is the real winner. And it doesn't lift anybody else up, and it doesn't address 760 million Americans declaring bankruptcy every year because they can't afford health care. It doesn't address that. Nobody cares.
So we're talking about all these things that need to happen in concert: money out of politics, ranked choice voting, all these essential systemic changes. How would you say do we start to get there? And I know that's a very heavy question.
So my biggest fight is to try to encourage progressives mostly to stop voting for Democrats. Or because the Democrats, it's like we don't demand anything. You know, we talk about progressive politics, we talk about environmentalism, we talk about healthcare, we talk about all this stuff, and then as soon as there's an election, everybody just gets scared and then runs into the arms of the Democrats. And the Democrats are like, cool, we'll take your votes again. We don't have to do fuck all for you, but we'll gladly take your votes. And this happens every election cycle. And it happens with people that I know who I respect and who are really smart, much smarter than I am. And so that, instead of I guess they always complain that the Green Party doesn't do enough, or doesn't run a good enough campaigns or whatever. But collectively, I don't believe we're doing enough as progressives to ensure that party is stronger and is relevant. Rather than complaining about what the Green Party isn't every 4 years, why don't we take these next 4 years to make sure that it is, so that the next time around, people can proudly say, I'm going to vote Green, and this is why, because this platform directly mirrors my ideals, and this is what I believe the country needs. Rather than getting on the well, I have to vote Democrat or else, insert horrible Republican here is going to win. It's
right.
That doesn't. It's Groundhog Day, and it never gets better, because the Democratic Party doesn't want single payer healthcare. They never have. They love health insurance, corporate lobbyist dollars more than they love us, and they've proven it over and over and over again.
Big
and
time.
So, I think that's the biggest problem is progressives who probably would vote Green if it was all even, if there was ranked choice voting, let's say, or if they didn't feel like their vote was going to help a Republican win, which is another insane theory. But like those people need to vote, I think, for what their values are. If you're a libertarian, go vote libertarian. Like if you really look at the Green Party's 10 key values and you're like, wow, that's me, like vote for that party. Don't vote for like pro-war centrists that are never going to have single-payer healthcare. Vote for the Green Party, and then put your voice behind it, put your full throat behind it, and encourage your friends to do the same. And I've been living in this culture recently where not only do progressives abandon the Green Party every election cycle, like I get so much hate for voting Green from progressives because they honestly believe that I'm helping a Republican win.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you're fucked either way. Like your own people hate you if you vote Green, and then obviously people on the right hate you anyway. And we got to stop being so divisive. I think as a progressive movement, I also wish that some of these progressive representatives, of which there are a few, like Ro Khanna, people like that, I wish that those people were in the Green Party because I don't think the Democratic Party deserves them. And they are championing ideas that the entrenched power of the Democratic Party is never, ever, ever going to acquiesce to. And so I would love it if those people would take their collective power and influence and move it to the Green Party to like bolster and support and make the party stronger.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, well, especially you bring up Ro Khanna. I mean, as of recent, I've been disappointed by some of his more recent votes, and you kind of have to wonder, they're part of a party that straight up hates their ideas that they're supposed to stand for, and then we always lose by just a little bit. It always goes one way. We always lose, there were always just enough present votes. There were always just enough this, and we always just lose by a little bit, to the point where you're just like, this is by design. And yeah, if there was an alternative outside of the Democratic Party, it wouldn't be by design anymore. And keeping it focused on the Greens, because I don't agree with everything the Green Party has done strategically. I'm sure you don't either. I mean, no institution is perfect. If I wanted to find things to complain about with the Greens, I could. If I wanted to find things to complain about with PSL, I could. Say with any part, People's Party, whatever else. There's things I like, things I don't like. But I think the Greens in particular, because they have made the most strides electorally compared to other lefty parties, sometimes they are a lightning rod for some of those shortcomings.
Oh, for sure. And I think that I don't mean to be here, championing the Green Party as if it's like without its shortfalls.
Sure.
I mostly just mean as a platform, like if the 10 key values of the Green Party, like as a platform, like as a progressive American, like that spoke to me.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who understands that 760 million Americans every year will declare bankruptcy because they can't afford healthcare, and that Americans have been taught that this is just a system we have to accept when the rest of the world can offer comprehensive single-payer healthcare to all its citizens with much less GDP. We have $5 trillion to spend on blowing up countries and occupying it for 20 years. We have $5 trillion, and nobody asks where that money comes from. The second you mention helping people, where are we going to get the money?
Where are we going to get it? Russ, who's going to pay for that? Who's going to, are your CD sales paying for it? What do we do?
Yeah. And so, as a progressive, like this, the fact that single payer healthcare is one of the green, is a foundational centerpiece of the whole platforms. That's really important to me. And no other party has that.
Mm-hmm.
And I read Audacity of Hope when Barack Obama was a senator, and I thought, wow, this guy's like, he kind of gets it. And then he was president, and he had both houses of Congress, and he didn't even invite anyone from the single payer lobby to the table when he was trying to revamp our healthcare. And it was really upsetting for me. I was like, he's already gotten a taste of what kind of dollars can flow if he keeps status quo with like for-profit healthcare. And it was a bum out. Like I wasn't really surprised, but I was like, after reading Audacity of Hope, I was like, okay, this guy's coming at us from a different angle, and maybe something cool would happen. And
I was surprised it was as disappointing as it was. I mean, I didn't expect it. I expected a little bit more from 8 years of him.
yeah,
But he showed us. I mean, he showed us who he really is. And I mean, I'm not going to speak for you, but I'll speak for me. I mean, I really gave the guy the benefit of the doubt for the longest time. Way, way longer than I should have. And there's plenty of video footage backing it up where I'm like, I think deep down that activist from Chicago is still in there. No, no, not at all. I mean, he even at the very end, he totally just said, "Hey, I'm a moderate Republican." Those are his words, not mine. Those are his words. And well, let me ask you this, and then I want to end on something a little lighter, just a little bit of hockey to close. But and I vote for Greens all the time too. Uh, were you a little inspired by some of the wins they've been picking up recently? I mean, they've won they've won locally a fair amount. I mean, there's been some good results in the past couple weeks. I mean,
yeah. No, the joke among Greens is because people who pay a slight amount of attention once in a while to the Green Party they just like to come out with statements like the Greens should just focus on running down ballot. And those people don't know that like the Greens are just killing it down ballot. The Greens are killing it locally. Every election cycle, more and more people on school boards, city councils, mayors, stuff like that. And you got to start somewhere. And I think that no, I'm impressed with that. And I think that, I mean, it's an idea that will resonate with people. And that's why I think that if we opened up the debates and people were like, wow, like I really like what this party has to say, I'm going to vote for that. And especially, like I said, we do these things in concert where if people are like, well, I want to vote for the Greens, but because it's a winner take all election and they're scaring me with this Republican, I don't know if I want to do that. It's like, well, if you have ranked choice voting, like you could do that. And your second vote could be for the Democrat. And so you're still doing the right thing. You're still voting your conscience, but you're not worried about being a spoiler, which is why I get all the hate that I get at election time because I'm a spoiler. And so I think
that too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't believe it for a second, so it doesn't really bother me.
You don't think we're that powerful?
No.
You don't think you and I sway?
No.
I thought for years it was just me and you. Even
Yeah.
before I connected with you online, I was like, me and the guy from Good Riddance, we control this.
Yeah. I have a friend who's a Green, and this last election they finally caved and voted for a Democrat. And then when Biden won, I hit him up and I'm like, your vote did it, man. Like you crossed over and you pushed Joe Biden right across the finish line.
Was he at brunch when you texted him?
No. And so I think down ballot, the Green Party is having great success, and I just think that Green Party and the Libertarian Party, like in our country, we basically have 4 parties that have like the bulk of the registered voters, and at least those 4 parties ought to be part of any kind of serious presidential debate. And if it's not, then it's just performative and it's a show. And American people are being shortchanged. And I just think that that's unconscionable. And so like we have to find a way. And so you asked earlier, how do we do this? How can we overturn Citizens United? How can we make ranked choice voting? All of these things. And so a lot of times it's going to happen state by state. Canada's healthcare system started in Saskatchewan. Like it started one province and then spread. And so by getting out there,
how we'll get to single payer.
Our country?
Yeah, because I do. I think that's the way it's going to happen. I would prefer federal right away. That would be easier. But I think it's going to happen pretty much one state at a time.
I think that's probably what's going to happen based on how federalism works and just the way that our country's set up. But I just think there needs to be a starting point where there's somebody championing it. Like right now, we're supposed to like thank the stars every day and throw a fucking parade that we have the Affordable Care Act. And if people think that's the greatest thing they're ever going to see. And so like we got a long way to go.
Yeah. Yeah, no kidding. Well, so someone has a question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Since we're talking about electoralism and parties, Aspen Fallen wants to know: are you familiar with the People's Party? And if so, what are your thoughts on it?
I am familiar with the People's Party. Uh, I'm going to stay positive and just reaffirm my allegiance to the Green Party.
All right, that's fair. Um, can we talk a little bit of hockey to end on something lighter?
Yeah, I'd love
All
to.
right, cool, man. So you're a hockey scout. How how does that happen, if you don't mind my asking? Like, did you play? Like,
I started playing as an adult, like when the Sharks came to the Bay Area. That was when I
nice.
started playing.
But how'd you get into that? Like, how does one? I mean, I'm sorry for such like a basic question, but how does one become a hockey scout?
I think everybody's path is different. I mean, for a lot of guys, they used to play like at a higher level than I ever played. Uh,
Okay,
a lot of times, in my case, it's just right place, right time, and knowing the right person who was able to advocate for me. But ultimately, you have to know, I guess, a little. You have to know what you're doing. Like
sure.
somebody has to like decide that they're going to bank on you to know the right things about the right players in your area. So I was fortunate that there was somebody who played in the National Hockey League who was a good Riddance fan, and I became friends with.
Oh, that's so badass.
And then that person, so in the mid 2000s, because all my life people have been like, dude, you just never shut up about hockey. You should work in hockey, like. And but like growing up in a beach town, I never played all this stuff. I got neck tattoos. Like, what am I going to do? And so. Uh, in the mid 2000s, I did this online course with Sports Management Worldwide, like a hockey GM/scout course. I was like, this looks kind of cool. And like, just, it was a really interesting 8 weeks of online hockey education. And because I'd become a student of the game, like after watching it for so many years and just analyzing and breaking things down. And so then I was like, well, now what do I do? I got this degree from this online thing. But then my buddy, it turns out that he was also part owner of a team in the Western Hockey League. And right around that same time, mid 2000s, California born and trained players were beginning to like find their way up to the Western Hockey League. Players who, they weren't getting D1 scholarships because they're on the West Coast, so they weren't getting seen, but they were good enough players that they could play at a higher level than what was, the tier leagues out here. And so my friend asked his GM, he's like, hey, I got a friend in California. I think he knows what he's talking about. Do you want a pair of eyes down there? And the guy was like, sure. And so the GM called me. We talked for about an hour, and I was working for the Kootenai Ice in the Western Hockey League, and that was
Nice.
2007. So I started, driving up and down the California, going to see in the Western Hockey League, we draft Bantam age players, so 14 turning 15. So I'm watching Bantam hockey and filing reports, and did that for 5 years. And somewhere in there in 2010, I got a chance to do a scouting internship with the Anaheim Ducks. So they sent me on a couple trips, which was awesome. And then after 5 years with the Kootenai Ice, I switched to the Tri-City Americans, who I work for now. And all on the way, getting a chance to meet other scouts on the staffs and just learn, pick things up, just learn best practices. There's a guy on our staff now, Dino Caputo, out of Lethbridge, who I just learned so much from every time I talk to that guy. And yeah, it's pretty cool. Like, I want to scout in the NHL someday for sure. I would love to do it. But for now, like, working in the Western Hockey League is an awesome gig. And I just love going to the rink. And I watch hockey even more differently now than I used to. But that's how it came about. Like, just kind of right place, right time. Had somebody who was willing to go to bat for me, and then I guess did enough since then, like to establish and keep that gig.
That's a really cool, yeah, that's a really cool story, man. I mean, that's really, um, you might say no to this because I think you're a Devils guy, but if you come across a killer goalie, will you call the Pittsburgh Penguins? Asking for a friend.
Penguins have enough good players. They don't need to worry about
They
goalies.
need a goalie. They need a goalie. We have I yeah, we're struggling in the net, man. We're struggling. I know that they win some. I mean, I'm from there, so that's who I grew up with. But yeah,
They
why
ought to
is
get. They ought to
Jersey?
try to get. They ought to try to get the hometown boy John Gibson out of Anaheim. Have him come back to Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Um, why is Jersey your team? If you're yeah, I thought maybe you were from there, but that's just the team you connected with, or
It's a little bit of a story. I'll make it real short. So yeah, so I being a hockey fan in Santa Cruz, it was like the late '80s. There's there's no team to root for. The Sharks aren't here yet. LA is too far away, and so I'm watching. ESPN has got like 2 or 3 NHL games on a week back then, so I'm watching every game. And for some reason, this is 1980, the '87-'88 season. For some reason, the Devils were on a lot. I don't know why. ESPN just
hmm.
put the Devils on, and back then they had the
They
green.
were a dynasty for a while, weren't they? Like
This was
they
before
were.
that. They had
Oh,
never
okay.
they had never made the playoffs,
Oh, okay.
and they had the green and red uniforms back then. So they're on all the time, and so I'm starting to like get to know the players. So like there's John McClain, there's Pat Verbeek, there's Patrick Sundstrom, there's Mark Johnson, who was on the U.S. Miracle on Ice Olympic team, and they got this fiery coach Jim Schoenfeld's like his rookie year as a head coach. They got this big lanky goalie Sean Burke. So I started like recognizing these players, and they were kind of scrappy. They were a scrappy team with just enough skill to like win some close games. And I just started like they became my team just by virtue of like they were on a lot, and I got used to the players. I knew who the players were and their names and stuff. And then so I'm following them all that year. They've never made the playoffs. And then the last game of the season, they were in Chicago. And if they won, they would sneak in as the 8th seed in the Wales Conference. And they'd never made the playoffs before. And so they're in Chicago. They tie the game super late, and then they won in overtime. And I was like, oh man. And they were like celebrating on the ice because they were finally in the playoffs.
Mhm.
And I felt like I was like, cool, this is my team. Like we're going somewhere. And
Yeah.
then they upset the Capitals. They upset the Islanders in the playoffs. Two series they were not supposed to win, and took Boston to 7 games in the conference final, including the Don Koharski, like, hey, have another donut, that whole thing, if you heard about that controversy. Jim Schoenfeld came off the ice after that in one of those games in that series against Boston and was screaming at Don Koharski, the referee, and they had an argument in the hallway. You can YouTube it. It's crazy.
Oh, I'll have
And
to do it.
and Jim Schoenfeld calls Koharski a fat pig. Is have another donut, you fat pig. And
Gee.
because the NHL didn't do anything, the referees refused to show up for the next game of the series. So a conference final game was refereed by local rink referees.
Wow,
And
I did know about that. I
it
gotta
was
look
a
that up.
yeah, it was a bloodbath. And it was but that whole thing happened in that series. Boston went on to lose to Edmonton in the Stanley Cup final. But by then I was hooked. I was like, fuck, this team,
Sure.
this is like I'm in. And then later on, later on, Marty Brodeur comes along, and Scott Stevens comes along, and Scott Niedermayer, and Stanley Cups. But just that 87-88 season is what did it for me.
That's really cool, man. Well, Russ, thank you so much for being so generous with your time and sharing your insights on all the things I love: hockey, politics, music. You get another shout out here. John Wood says, "Very cool to see Russ on." In closing, is there anything you'd like to plug before we sign out here?
Well, you mentioned earlier I do have my second solo album coming out January 28th. So keep an eye out for that. The first single is already up on YouTube. The song is called Babel. And so I'm encouraging people to check that out and look for the solo album. And then, like I said, Good Riddance we are still playing. And as things start opening up, we're going to be playing even more. So
Do you have a website for your solo stuff, or?
no, there's a Facebook just for that for my
Okay.
music, and cover everything on Twitter. So like the good stuff. hockey stuff and my solo stuff.
Right on, Russ. Well, thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate it, and thanks for doing everything you do. And I hope to catch a show soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
All right, cheers, man. Peace.
See ya.
That was Russ Rankin. Y'all go check his stuff out. You can check him out over on his Facebook at Russ Rankin, and you can follow him on Twitter. I have his Twitter handle in the description. Very compelling guy on Twitter, very insightful, and makes some great music. I'm more familiar with Good Riddance than his solo stuff, but I'm going to check out some of that solo stuff, and I look forward to it. Thank you again to John and Aspen Fallon for the Super Chat contributions. I appreciate it very much. You help keep the show on the air. And folks, the holidays are coming up. Patreon.com/RobLaCode. You know what makes a great holiday gift? A theme song. And you can get one. Patreon.com/RobLaCode. It's one of the perks I offer. And it's for a give what you can level. Even $1 a month goes a long way. Don't wait. Get it now for you or a loved one. Last announcement, November 27th. Graham Elwood and myself, Los Angeles, California. We got a stand-up show. It's this new venue in Toluca Lake. Get your tickets. Don't wait. Los Angeles, November 27th. You can grab tickets at romplacone.com. And 2022, I'm going to be announcing some tour dates really soon. I'm finalizing some plans here. Going to be announcing some tour dates really soon. And speaking of hockey, Canada, I'm coming. Can't wait to see you, Canada. And I'm going to be seeing you next spring. Going to have a lot of final announcements on that very soon. So keep your eyes and ears open. I'll be announcing that more next week. In the meantime, we'll be back on Thursdays with the headlines episode. And in the meantime, you know the drill. Lucy, she says meow, and I say peace, love, and a general strike. Peace, y'all.